Have you ever watched someone you gave your entire life to look at you like you don't belong? Not a stranger, not an enemy, your own child. Imagine standing outside a church, listening to wedding music echo through the walls. Music meant for joy, celebration, new beginnings, while you're silently asking yourself one question. Did I do something wrong? Or am I just too poor to be seen? That was Elena Brooks, a mother who spent decades stitching dreams for others while her own hands bled quietly in the dark. She didn't ask for luxury. She didn't expect applause. She never wanted a seat in the front row. All she wanted was to see her son get married. But on that day, the day she thought would be one of the proudest moments of her life, she learned something no mother should ever have to learn: that love doesn't always protect you from shame. Because when Alina finally stepped inside that church, she didn't receive a smile. She didn't receive a hug. She received a gesture, a single hand movement from her son, Lucas Brooks, telling her to stop, to stay back, to disappear. And in that moment, the woman who sacrificed everything, every meal skipped, every night awake, every dream delayed, realized she was being erased from the life she built. But what Lucas didn't know, what no one in that church expected, was that the truth has a way of walking forward even when you try to push it aside. And before the vows were spoken, before the rings were exchanged, a mother's quiet dignity would bring an entire room to silence. Welcome back to The Mother's Voice, where untold sacrifices are finally spoken, and every story comes straight from a mother's heart. Before we begin, take a moment to hit that subscribe button, because if you've ever felt unseen, misunderstood, or forgotten by the ones you love most, this story is going to stay with you. Elena Brooks had learned to live quietly. At 56, she no longer expected life to be kind, only manageable. Her mornings began before sunrise, in a small apartment that smelled faintly of fabric, soap, and old memories. A single sewing machine sat near the window, its hum as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. For over 30 years, Elena had sewn clothes for other people's milestones: wedding dresses she would never wear, suits for men who never learned her name, graduation gowns that celebrated futures she helped build but never shared. Her hands told the story better than words ever could. Thin scars from needles, skin rough from endless work, hands that had shaped a life without ever being held in return. Lucas Brooks was the reason she never stopped. She raised him alone. No husband, no safety net, just long nights, tired smiles, and promises she made silently to herself. When Lucas was a child, Elena would sit beside his bed after working all night, watching him sleep, whispering prayers he would never hear. She skipped meals so he wouldn't feel the weight of poverty. She wore the same coat for years so he could have a new one when winter came. She never told him those things. Mothers rarely do. Lucas grew up smart, determined, ambitious. He studied hard, moved forward, climbed higher Elena ever imagined possible. And slowly, almost invisibly, he outgrew her world. The phone calls became shorter, the visits became less frequent, and somewhere along the way, Elena stopped being introduced as my mom. Still, she remained proud. So when Elena heard, by accident, that Lucas was getting married, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. There was no invitation, no message, no explanation. But a mother doesn't need permission to care. The morning of the wedding, Elena stood in front of her mirror, holding the only dress she owned that still felt respectful. It was simple, faded, carefully ironed. She looked at her reflection and whispered, "I won't stay long. I'll stand in the back. I just want to see him happy." With that, she picked up her worn purse, locked the door behind her, and stepped into the street, walking toward a church she was never invited to, and a truth she wasn't prepared to face. The church stood at the end of the street like something out of another life. Tall, white pillars, fresh flowers lining the entrance, soft music floating through the open doors. Elena Brooks slowed her steps as she approached. For a moment, she considered turning back. Everyone else arriving that morning looked so certain, their clothes crisp, their smiles confident, their footsteps sure. They belonged here. Elena adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder and took a quiet breath. She reminded herself why she came. Just see him, she thought. That's all. Inside, the air felt different, heavy with perfume, polished wood, and money. The pews were already filling up. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering excitedly, laughing softly, checking their phones. Elena chose a seat near the back, as close to the wall as possible. She kept her eyes low, but it didn't take long for people to notice her. A woman 2 rows ahead glanced back, then nudged her husband. He looked, then looked again. Their whispers weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Is she lost? Maybe she's staff. Elena's fingers tightened around her purse. She had heard whispers before. At stores, on buses, in waiting rooms where she didn't belong. She told herself this was no different. The music shifted. Heads turned toward the front of the church. Elena lifted her eyes. And there he was, Lucas Brooks, standing tall at the altar, perfectly tailored suit, confident posture, a smile that belonged to a man who had made it. For a brief moment, Elena forgot everything else. Her chest filled with something warm and painful all at once. He looks happy, she thought. That's all that matters. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She simply watched. She noticed how comfortable he looked in this world, a world of polished shoes and quiet laughter, a world far removed from late nights and flickering lights. And for the first time, a thought crossed her mind that she quickly pushed away. Do I still fit anywhere in his life? Elena swallowed hard and straightened her back. No matter what, she told herself, this was still her son, and nothing, not whispers, not stares, not silence, could take that away. At least, that's what she believed, until Lucas looked up and saw her. Lucas Brooks had imagined this moment 1,000 times, standing at the altar, surrounded by elegance, stepping into the life he believed he had earned. The church was filled with quiet excitement. Guests whispered, phones were silenced, everything was moving exactly as planned, until something pulled his attention away. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling. Lucas looked toward the back of the church, and his heart dropped. She stood there, half hidden near the last row, small, still, holding her purse like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Elena Brooks, his mother. For a moment, Lucas forgot how to breathe. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not today. Not like this. His mind raced faster than his heart. Did someone invite her? Did she misunderstand? What will people think? He became painfully aware of everything around him, the polished shoes, the expensive dresses, the eyes that noticed everything. Elena hadn't moved. She hadn't announced herself. She hadn't asked for attention. She was just standing there, looking at him with a softness that felt completely out of place in a room built on appearances. Their eyes met, and in Elena's expression, Lucas saw something he hadn't expected. Pride. Not demand, not guilt, just pride. It made his chest ache. Elena took a small step forward, not toward the altar, just closer, enough to see her son's face clearly. That was all it took. Lucas felt panic surge through him. He lifted his hand quickly, sharply, a silent command. Stop. The gesture lasted less than a second, but Elena understood. Her face changed, not dramatically, not loudly, just a subtle tightening around the eyes. The light in them dimmed. She lowered her gaze, and Lucas turned away, pretending nothing had happened. The music continued, the guests settled back into their seats, but Elena remained frozen. She had raised a man who could command rooms, close deals, shape his future. And yet, in front of everyone, she had just been told she did not belong in it. She swallowed the pain the same way she had swallowed hunger all those years ago, quietly, without complaint. But this time, the silence felt heavier, because some wounds don't bleed. They simply stay. Lucas Brooks had worked hard to become the man everyone admired. From the outside, his life looked perfect. A tailored suit, a confident smile, a successful career in finance. And today, standing near the altar, he was about to marry into a family that symbolized everything he had chased: status, comfort, respect. Guests whispered his name with approval. That's Lucas Brooks. He made it. What no one said out loud was what Lucas felt tightening inside his chest. Fear, not of marriage, but of being seen, because seated near the back of the church, unnoticed by most, was a woman who didn't belong to this polished world. Elena Brooks, his mother. She sat quietly, her worn hands folded in her lap, her dress simple and slightly faded. She had chosen it carefully, ironing it twice, hoping it would be good enough. Still, she felt small under the chandeliers and judgmental glances. Elena hadn't come to take pictures. She hadn't come to demand attention. She had come to pray for the son she raised through nightly tailoring, needle scars, and silent sacrifice. Lucas saw her. For a brief second, their eyes met, and in that moment, the life he had tried to forget rushed back. His jaw tightened, because now, standing among wealthy guests and powerful in-laws, that past felt dangerous, a reminder he didn't want attached to his new life. Near the front row, his future mother-in-law leaned toward him, her voice low but sharp. "Lucas, who is that woman?" He hesitated, just a second too long. She followed his gaze, eyes narrowing, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not appropriate. This is an important day." Lucas swallowed. He told himself he was protecting everyone, from discomfort, from whispers, from embarrassment. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't protecting his mother. He was hiding her. Elena, unaware of the storm forming around her, closed her eyes and silently prayed. "God, let my son be happy today, even if I don't belong in his world anymore." And somewhere between the altar and the pews, Lucas Brooks stood at a crossroads, between the man he had become and the mother who made it possible. Lucas Brooks took a slow step toward his mother. The church was filled with soft music, quiet murmurs, and the kind of polished elegance that made everything feel expensive and untouchable. To everyone else, it was a perfect wedding moment. To Elena Brooks, it felt like she was standing in the wrong world. Lucas leaned closer, lowering his voice so no one else would hear. "Mom, I think it's better if you leave for now, he said. We'll talk later. The words didn't come out harsh. They didn't need to. They still shattered her. Elena blinked, certain she had misunderstood. She searched his face, waiting for a smile, a correction, anything that would tell her she was wrong. But Lucas looked past her, not at her, past her. And in that moment, something inside Elena broke, quietly. She had imagined many versions of this day. She never imagined this one. Not the day her son would ask her to disappear. She remembered carrying him on crowded buses because she couldn't afford the fare for two. Remembered sewing late into the night, fingers bleeding, promising herself she would rest after he succeeded. Remembered skipping meals, smiling anyway, telling him she wasn't hungry. And now, this. Elena nodded slowly. Of course, she said gently. I understand. She stood up, clutching her worn handbag. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I just wanted to bless you, she added softly. As she turned toward the aisle, a voice cut through the air. Wait. Daniel stepped forward. Daniel's childhood friend, the boy who had grown up in the same neighborhood, the one who had seen everything. No, Daniel said firmly. She's not leaving. Heads turned, whispers spread. Daniel moved beside Elena, placing himself between her and the judgment in the room. If anyone belongs here, he said steadily, it's her. Lucas stared at him, stunned. Daniel, this is exactly what it is, Daniel interrupted, and you know it. Elena stood silently, eyes lowered, heart pounding. She hadn't asked for this. She never did. But as the church grew quiet, Lucas felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Because for the first time that day, someone wasn't applauding him. They were looking at him and judging the choice he had just made. Daniel pulled Lucas a few steps away, out of earshot, but not out of truth. Do you remember who you were before the suit? Daniel asked quietly. Lucas didn't answer. Daniel continued. Do you remember when you almost dropped out of college because you couldn't afford the fees? Lucas swallowed. Your mom took on extra tailoring work, Daniel said. She sewed until her hands cracked. I saw the needle scars. You didn't because she hid them. Lucas looked down. She never complained, Daniel went on. Not when she was exhausted, not when she was sick, not when she went to bed hungry so you could eat. The images came rushing back. Late nights, the hum of an old sewing machine, his mother pretending she was fine. You're standing here today, Daniel said, his voice low but unshakable, because she carried you here. Every step. Lucas's chest tightened. And now, Daniel added, you're asking her to leave because she doesn't fit the picture you're trying to sell. Lucas shook his head weakly. I'm just trying to keep things smooth. No, Daniel said, you're trying to erase where you came from. They stood in silence as the wedding music swelled again. Lucas turned slowly. Across the room, Elena Brooks stood alone, holding her bag like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was waiting, like she always had, for him. And suddenly, Lucas understood something that terrified him. If he let her walk out that door today, he wouldn't just lose his mother from the room. He would lose the man she raised him to be. And as the weight of that truth settled in, Lucas Brooks realized this wedding wasn't testing his love. It was testing his soul. Lucas Brooks stood frozen as the music swelled around him. The church felt smaller now, hotter, every breath heavier than the last. He watched his mother standing near the aisle, alone, quiet, holding her purse like armor. She wasn't asking for anything. She never had. She was just waiting, the same way she had waited through late nights, unpaid bills, and silent sacrifices. And suddenly, Lucas understood something with terrifying clarity. If he let her walk out that door today, he would never forgive himself. Not when the applause faded, not when the guests left, not even years from now. He took a step forward, then another. Whispers rippled through the pews as Lucas turned away from the altar and walked down the aisle, past polished shoes, past expensive dresses, past the life he thought he wanted. Elena Brooks is my mother. The words came out louder than he intended. The church fell silent. He reached her side and gently took her trembling hands into his own. For the first time that day, he looked directly at her. Really looked. "I asked you to leave," he said, his voice breaking, "and that was the worst mistake of my life." Elena's eyes widened. "I forgot," Lucas continued, swallowing hard. "I forgot who stood by me when no one else did. I forgot who believed in me before I was worth believing in." Tears finally slipped down Elena's cheeks, but she didn't speak. Lucas turned to face the room. "My mother worked nights tailoring clothes for strangers," he said. "She skipped meals so I could eat. She hid her pain so I could dream." He paused, breath shaking. "And for a moment today, I was ashamed of the very woman who made me who I am." A murmur moved through the crowd. Lucas looked back at Elena. "I'm not asking you to wait outside," he said softly. "I'm asking you to sit where you belong." He led her to the front row, not behind him, not hidden, beside him. As they walked, people stood, some out of respect, some out of shock, some because something inside them had shifted. Daniel watched from a distance, his eyes heavy with relief. Lucas squeezed his mother's hand. "I don't want a future that doesn't include honoring you," he whispered. Elena smiled through tears, her voice barely audible. "I never needed a seat. I only needed my son." The music changed, but this time it didn't feel like a performance. It felt like truth. And for the first time that day, Lucas Brooks wasn't standing at the altar as a man trying to impress the world. He was standing as a son who finally remembered where he came from. For a moment, no one moved. The church, once filled with whispers and quiet judgment, now held a different kind of silence, the kind that settles after a truth is spoken out loud. Elena Brooks sat in the front row, her hands still shaking slightly in Lucas's grip. She wasn't used to being seen like this. For years, she had learned how to disappear, how to make herself small so her son could stand tall. Now, every eye in the room was on her. Lucas took a slow breath and turned toward the altar again, but something had changed. His shoulders no longer carried the stiff confidence of a man performing a role. They carried the weight and relief of honesty. "I need to say something," he said, his voice steady but raw. The officiant hesitated, then nodded. Lucas faced the guests. "I know today is supposed to be about perfection," he began, "about beautiful moments and flawless pictures." A few nervous smiles appeared. "But the truth is," he continued, "everything good in my life started long before today, long before success, long before this suit." He gestured gently toward his mother. "It started with a woman who worked with her hands until they were cracked and scarred. A woman who came home exhausted but still helped me with homework. A woman who believed in me when I was nobody." Elena lowered her head, tears falling freely now. Lucas's future in-laws shifted uncomfortably. "I almost made the mistake of pretending that past didn't exist," Lucas said, "of acting like the sacrifices that built me were inconvenient." His voice trembled. "That mistake ends here." Lucas turned back to Elena and knelt in front of her. "I'm sorry," he whispered.
for every time I made you feel invisible." Elena cupped his face the same way she had when he was a child. "Stand up," she said softly. "You don't kneel to me, you honor me by standing." He rose, helping her up with him. Together, they faced the room, and something shifted, not just in Lucas, but in everyone watching, because suddenly the wedding wasn't about wealth or appearances anymore. It was about gratitude, about roots, about remembering. As the ceremony prepared to continue, people began to look at Elena differently, not as a woman who didn't belong, but as the reason the groom did. And for the first time in her life, Elena Brooks didn't feel like she was borrowing space in someone else's world. She felt like she had earned it. The ceremony moved forward, but the air inside the church had changed. What once felt polished and distant now felt honest, fragile in the way truth always is. Guests sat a little straighter, smiles softened. The kind of attention that can't be bought had taken hold. Lucas stood beside Elena for a moment longer, then gently guided her back to the front row. She sat down slowly, still unsure if this was real. Her hands rested in her lap, palms open, as if she were afraid the moment might disappear if she held onto it too tightly. From the other side of the aisle, his future mother-in-law watched in silence. Her expression had shifted, less sharp now, more measured. She leaned toward her husband, whispered something, then stood. The movement caught everyone's attention. She walked toward Elena, heels clicking softly against the floor. Each step felt deliberate, careful. Elena looked up, bracing herself. "I owe you an apology," the woman said, her voice low but clear. "I judged you without knowing your story." Elena didn't answer right away. She had learned long ago that apologies didn't always come with understanding. "I thought success came from status," the woman continued, "but today I realized it comes from sacrifice." She paused. "You raised a good man." Elena's lips trembled. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Nearby, the bride, Camille, had been watching quietly. She stepped forward next, her eyes glossy. "I didn't understand before," she said to Elena, "but I do now." She reached for Elena's hands. "Thank you," Camille added, "for raising someone who knows how to choose what matters." Tears slipped freely down Elena's cheeks. This time, she didn't hide them. Lucas watched the exchange, his chest aching in a way that felt necessary. He had spent years chasing approval from the wrong places, never realizing he already had the one that mattered most. Daniel caught his eye from across the room and gave a small nod. "You did the right thing," it said. As the officiant cleared his throat and resumed the ceremony, Lucas took his place at the altar, not as a man divided between two worlds, but as someone finally standing on solid ground. He glanced back once more. Elena smiled at him. Not a proud smile, not a triumphant one, a relieved one. The kind that says, "I can finally breathe." And as the vows began, Lucas realized something profound. The greatest commitment he made that day didn't start at the altar. It started the moment he chose to honor the woman who taught him how to love. The vows were spoken. The rings were exchanged. Applause filled the church as Lucas Brooks and Camille were pronounced husband and wife. But for Elena Brooks, the moment that mattered most had already happened. She sat quietly in the front row, hands folded, tears drying slowly on her cheeks. She wasn't thinking about the music or the decorations or the photographs that would soon be taken. She was thinking about something far simpler. Her son had looked at her, and this time he hadn't looked away. As the guests stood and celebrated, Lucas turned back one more time. Their eyes met across the space that once felt like a wall between them. Now it felt like a bridge. He smiled. Not the confident smile he wore for the world, but the one he used to wear when he was a boy coming home with good news. Elena pressed her hand to her heart. That was enough. Later, outside the church, as sunlight spilled across the steps and laughter echoed through the air, people approached her differently. Some with quiet respect, some with gratitude, some with tears in their eyes. But Elena didn't need recognition. She had carried her pride quietly for decades. She knew how to do it without applause. Lucas walked over and stood beside her. "I almost lost you today," he said softly. Elena shook her head. "No," she replied. "You found yourself." She reached up and straightened his collar, just as she had done on his first day of school. "Remember this feeling," she added, "when life gets loud again, when success tries to make you forget." Lucas nodded. "I will," he promised. "I swear." As the celebration continued, Elena stepped back, not into the shadows, but into peace. Her job had never been to stand in the spotlight. Her job had been to raise a man who would one day stand up for what was right. And today, he had. Not because of wealth, not because of pressure, but because love finally spoke louder than pride. And if there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this: never be ashamed of the hands that built your future. Welcome back to The Mother's Voice, where untold sacrifices are finally spoken. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because somewhere out there, a mother is still waiting to be seen.